I joined the company when there were 900 people. I left the company when there were 90,000 people. The first thing you got to do is figure out what markets you're going to go after first. The most effective resource that any sales leader have is a sales planning and operation person. Early days, it was no revenue. And then what makes me a little bit different than other sales leaders is I do have a focus on cost, the bottom line, not just top line. And that's always been my story to grow the team. Culture is everything. If you have the right people there and they're there for the right reason, then we can make pivots when it comes to new products or something not working. When I left, it was close to $1 billion for the year.
This bonus episode breaks down how to scale international sales from the ground up to nearly $1 billion in revenue. Rick Kelley joined Meta when it had 900 employees and left when it had 90,000. In this clip, he shares the exact framework he used to build and scale Meta's mid-market international sales organization, including how to prioritize markets, structure headcount, and hire for long-term leadership. This is a good blueprint. All right, let's get into it.
Well, I joined the company when there were 900 people.
Wow.
I left the company when there were 90,000 people. So there were no playbook to go by, or, it wasn't like I was joining something and then having to refine it. It was, hey, Rick, go figure it out. And, I had great people around me to help me do that. I wasn't here alone and, all by myself by any means. But the first thing you got to do is figure out what markets are you going to go after first? Should I hire 5 people for the UK or 5 people for France? Or, how do I, in a limited resource and limited headcount way, how do I go about, choosing the allocation of different headcount? And so one of the things we did in the early days was create an economic study utilizing probably 7 to 8 different characteristics. What is our user base? What's the global total ad revenue, online ad revenue? How many users does Facebook have in those countries? And we kind of weighted them all and came up with a score for every country. So that meant that if I was given 150 heads, I would know the order of which I would go and hire them. I'm going to hire my 5th person in the UK, then my 1st person for the Nordics, and then my 3rd person for, France, whatever it was, so that if my boss had given me 18 new heads, 28 new heads, 38 new heads, I'm not saying, I don't quite know how I'm going to use them. I'd say, this is exactly how I'm going to use them. And here's how much revenue I can actually forecast as a result of this, study that we did over a 3-month period. So I think the lesson in the early days is when you start to build a sales team is, you don't just do the finger in the air and just start hiring willy-nilly based on where you currently have customers. You got to figure out where your opportunity is and invest for that opportunity. I think the nice part about being in a centralized sales team, like in Dublin or Barcelona or London, wherever, is that you can also move headcount around based on where you see traction and needs and things like that. And a good example of that is maybe we overinvested in account managers and we needed more salespeople. Well, then you can move some people around based on the skill sets that you needed. Or in 2012, we started seeing gaming become this massive revenue stream for the company. It ended up being 15% of the company revenue back in 2012, 2013, when everybody was getting a smartphone and had an iPhone or an Android and people were playing games and downloading games. It was a boom to the company. And so one of the things that my boss had decided to do was pull gaming out of the regional structure and create a 5th region for the company, which was gaming. So you've got North America sales, Latin America, EMEA, APAC, and gaming. So it was treated as the 5th region. And because I had a pretty sizable portfolio of gaming companies in my EMEA mid-market team, she asked me to take that global role on. And the next 10 years meant me growing that business out from Dublin.
We're big believers here at GTM Fund that strategy alone doesn't win deals. Execution does. But 85% of sellers are stuck managing their books in spreadsheets because their data is scattered across dozens of tools. ZoomInfo Copilot Workspace fixes that. It's the first workspace where sellers actually work, complete buyer context, CRM data, and AI-powered insights in one place. Execution wins deals. Everything else is really just preparation. You can learn more at zoominfo.com/copilot. It'll be in the show notes. And we want to go down that route. I have so many questions about the gaming business itself. But even before we get there, you built out very intentionally this plan And that way you had a good idea of exactly which countries and who you'd hire for and that prioritization framework. If a startup, for example, or company is looking to expand into EMEA now, would you recommend that similar playbook or would you recommend any kind of adaptations to it?
So when I came to interview for the Yahoo role, and I'm gonna go back now a couple years,
Yeah.
I was I wrote a 39-page PowerPoint presentation on how I would go and build the European mid-market sales team for Yahoo. I had been doing it. I didn't need to do that. I thought that I had to woo the boss and make sure that I showed up prepared, not realizing that he was kinda trying to get me, to make the move across the pond. But my point is that I had a plan and I created it, and I everything from how we're gonna recruit, the timeline of when we're gonna have people at desk, you know, time to prospect, time to whatever activity we needed to do. And I absolutely think that if you're a startup or, starting to think about what your go-to-market playbook looks like, you need to figure out who are the constituents that you wanna sell to. Is it partners? Is it agencies? Is it third parties? Is it direct customers, big customers, small customers? Lay it all out in a document of some sort. And then you start to put a plan around how do you address them? What's the timing to address them? What's the priority of maybe one channel versus another? And then, yeah, for Europe, I think, or any international team, you have to think about what markets you go after. And you need a level of critical mass in those markets. Because if you're only hiring one person to address Italy, if that person leaves, is ineffective, goes on maternity or paternity leave, you got to have a little bit of depth there in order to keep the market going. So these are all things to be very, very thoughtful about. And I don't think you always have to put people in the markets in order to be incubating a market. You might start that in a centralized team, get the activity moving. And after a year or two and the, revenue starts to be meaningful, then you can deploy a local office because that creates a whole other set of, dynamics. You've got to have a legal entity. You've got to understand local HR laws, which are very different from France to Italy to Spain to Germany. And you can't just say, hey, we're going to hire in those markets and not have a good understanding of what that might mean if things don't work out in that market or if that person doesn't work out. So there's lots to be thoughtful for. And I think the more that you can get that on paper before you start to execute, you can see around corners better.
That's great advice. And like you said, there's a lot of different nuances to every single different country in EMEA. How would you recommend startups think about that distribution of sales reps, whether it's centralized or deployed in countries themselves across EMEA? Should it be a singular country focus, so one country at a time? Should it be distributed across a few different countries when you're looking to first come into EMEA?
It depends on the size of the startup. And a lot of what I do now, post my meta world, is work with startups on their go to market. So this is a conversation that I feel like I have once a week, if not more. There's not a one size fits all, but I have a bias. And that bias is to be how do you add optionality to your sales organization? Meaning, if you only have four people to hire and you think that it's one in the UK, one in France, one in Germany, I don't know, add another country there. I would rather see you be a little bit more thoughtful and say, let's put those first four people in a singular location where A, they can learn from each other. B, English is widely spoken across the business world, in EMEA, but, less so in certain countries. But, if you're having, if things are not as busy in France as you might have expected, a big competitor or whatever reason, you could always have that French person calling into Belgium where they speak French or Switzerland where they speak French. Spain, for example, when we hired our first Spanish employees, they were also calling into Latin America because we didn't have a Latin American team at the time. So if you have them in the country and it's only one or two people, it's harder to gain that optionality and be able to move people's focus around. Another example in Southern Europe is everybody goes on holidays for all of August. But if your team isn't going on holidays, what more could you have them do so that they're not ineffective for 3 weeks and sitting on their hands? And so anytime I talk to a startup, I try and say, look, you don't have the resources to go put in, 35 people across the region. Let's be a little bit more thoughtful about how we can get more, from a limited resource there.
That's excellent advice. Yeah, I really look for those overlap areas. So you took us through your market segmentation of EMEA and where to focus first. Take us through what happened after that. So you've got your plan approved. What do the early execution days look like?
You've got to get the piping right. So how are we reporting on sales? How are we forecasting, goal setting. And in a world where you're going 0 to whatever, these things are a little bit more challenging to get right. Um, so you gotta set up a comp plan. You probably don't wanna have an uncapped comp plan or because, in the early days when your goal is $1,000,000 in the first quarter, it's easy to come in at 1.5 million, and now you've come in at 150% a goal and you're paying out ridiculous amounts of money to your sales team. Similarly, you might have over forecasted and you only come in at 75% to goal and you don't want your whole team to be hurt. So let's look at a comp plan that works for the company and a comp plan that works for the sales or the team itself. Then you've got to figure out like operationally, sales ops, how do we distribute the goal? How do we forecast? How are we looking at the pipeline? So I think the most effective cross-functional resource that any sales leader can have is a sales planning and operation person that is focused on that segment of the business. So, as my career developed and, became more influential with different cross-functional partners from marketing to sales engineering, so on and so forth, my number one partner has always been that sales planning and operations, the CFO of my organization, if you would, because they're going to help you create investment cases, figure out if your investments are working, how are they paying off, because there's nothing easier to go and ask for, more money to go and grow the team when you can say, this is what you gave me 6 months ago. Here's what I've done with that. Give me this, and then I can do this as well, right? Like that's the playbook where, while the team was probably 150 people large, give or take, when I moved on to gaming in 2013 after 4 years, it didn't get there on day one or day, first, second year or third year. That was an incremental growth along the way. And we needed to prove the value of every resource that we were given in order to get more. So that's always to me, it's about, don't just think about the salespeople or account managers that need to be at desk. What other key roles or leaders do you need to help you tell the story and write the right story? The other thing I would say, as the guy coming in to start the team, doesn't mean that I was the manager of every person within it. So you've got to hire good leaders and you've got to invest in people that are going to be able to do the job in 18 months' time when maybe the team goes from 10 to 30 people. Are they still capable of leading the 30 people so hire ahead of maybe where you think the team is going to go, because the last thing you want to do is layer somebody after, a year or two because the job has just got too big for them. So how can you sell the vision to people that are like, yes, the team is maybe only 10 people now, but here's what I need you to do over the next 18 months, and that team's going to look like this. And if they can come on that journey, then that's great.
Hmm. Yeah, and you essentially, it's almost like incubating a startup within a larger organization. You really built it from zero.
100%. That's a great way to describe it. It's like nobody in Menlo Park back in the day, or Sunnyvale, in the Yahoo days, knew anything about the team that I was, developing. But once you start to, get the team in place at desk and putting numbers on the board, then all of a sudden they're saying, "Whoa, let's have another look at this."
And when building out that leadership team and being really thoughtful about those hires, were you prioritizing certain skill sets around expansion into EMEA? So people who'd already run that playbook before, or did you find that wasn't necessarily a characteristic or trait or experience area that you had to prioritize?
I think back in the day, I tried to prioritize language skills. So I probably over pivoted to that. Um, and then rolled that back. I ended up rolling it back where how can I get good managerial and leadership talent, even if they don't speak the language, to be the directors? And then maybe we could hire or develop the individual contributors to the point where they could be team leaders and more junior managers, and they speak the language of the local country, but that there's still some pretty senior talent above them to be able to, build out a proper go-to-market plan for that particular subregion. And as you get bigger and as you get to be a certain level of scale, you do need to go from EMEA into Northern Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe, whatever the breakout might be, or vertical. You might say, you know what? Autos and travel and gaming, whatever, there's benefits to doing that too. So you got to sit down and you got to be able to spar with some other senior leaders to say, well, here's the pros and cons, and maybe here's why that wouldn't work. And having the right people around you to do that, I think is one of the things that I would always advocate for. Even if they were a little pricey to come in because they were at a more senior level, in a year's time, you're going to need that seniority.
Hmm. And how do you anticipate AI now impacting the potential global expansion and that emphasis on language abilities?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in AI making the world more efficient. No doubt about it. I think that there are tasks that take place within a sales functionality that AI is great for, like helping prospect, helping surface the right. I just got off a call today where, the tool itself, creates emails for prospects that helps identify prospects. It's like a Tinder for companies. They can swipe right or swipe left based on how good that prospect looks, to be a fit for the product that they're selling. There's a lot of things that they will do in terms of like business development efficiency, and I'm a big believer in that. But I also don't believe that it will replace building relationships, which I think is such a big part of sales. You could probably get a sale over the line just with an AI type bot or, utilizing some form of machine learning. But when things go wrong, people want to talk to people.
Definitely. And you mentioned the number 150. So 150 people when you left the organization to go build global. So you scaled, sounds like, from 0 to 150. What kind of time frame was that? And what kind of revenue was reflective of that too?
Yeah. So day one, there were two salespeople already at desk before I came. So I was number three coming in as the manager. And then, yeah, it was close to 150 when I then moved on and that organization got moved into a different one. Early days, it was no revenue, and then when I left, it was close to a billion for the year. And what was funny is that we were like neck and neck with the North America team that was, similarly built, right mid market. And I can remember my boss saying that has never happened before. Like, how is EMEA the same revenue as North America? And I was pretty proud of that. And I told that to the team because then the team wore that as a badge of honor as well. But the truth of the matter is gaming was a big part of that revenue piece of the pie. And, you could have Candy Crush, which is by King, now owned by Activision. They're sitting in London, but they want to advertise to every person around the globe. So, that might be in your region in EMEA, but that's a big advertiser. And so that's one of the ways that we got up to, 900 million pretty quickly after, it was about 3.5 years when we got to that point. So yeah, so that's what, kind of part of the idea was incredibly efficient when it came to cost of sales, when it came to revenue per head. And I always really tried to, and kind of maybe what makes me a little bit different than other sales leaders is I do have a focus on cost, on, the bottom line, not just top line. And I like to be a really efficient sales channel and a really cost effective one. And that's always been my story to kind.